Good evening, everybody. I hope you're well. Thank you for joining us this evening for a brand new lecture series, a virtual shirim of Torah and the Unborn Child. We're delighted to welcome back to 2021 our virtual scholar in residence, definitely a scholar, but unfortunately only virtually with us, Rabbi Manning. Lovely to see you again, Rabbi Manning.
Thank you, Rabbi Chapper. Really amazing to be here.
Please,
Nice
at
to...
some point.
What's that?
So please, at some point, you'll join us physically.
Yes.
But we're still delighted you can join us virtually to share your Torah with us. We're delighted to have this three-part series of Torah and the Unborn Child. This evening, we'll be looking at abortion and fetal reduction. Rabbi Manning, it's over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Chapper. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for coming on. I don't suppose you've got many other places to go, is the truth. So maybe I shouldn't feel too excited that you chose to come to the shir, but nevertheless, it's a mitzvah to listen to the words of Torah. Hopefully, we'll be able to fulfill that and learn some interesting Torah tonight. Many of you are not strangers. Many of you were on the shirim that we gave earlier in the year. We tackled all sorts of interesting topics. And when Rabbi Chapper and I were trying to work out what was the best topic to look at for this mini series, we came on this particular topic, which is fascinating. It's controversial. It's difficult. It's emotional and psychological as well. Torah and the unborn child. We're going to be looking in three parts at three different topics, and they build on each other. And this is an important point. Meaning, if you come to this shir, then next week we'll build on that and become more contextual through the sources we learned today. Excuse me. And in 2 weeks from now, please God, we'll really, put the cap on that. And the three topics that we're dealing with are Torah, are abortion and fetal reduction tonight. Next week, please God, we're going to look at genetic modification of embryos, which is related but a different topic. And 2 weeks from now, in the last of the series, we'll look at the issue of conjoined twins. And there are a lot of similarities with these questions, and we'll see as we get to grips with the sources tonight, they will stand us in good stead. I would like to just make clear at the outset, I'm not a medical man. I can see already that there are medical experts on. I see Martin here, and I defer to their medical expertise, and their input is certainly welcome on these issues. But my background is in law, so that doesn't really help me that much on issues of Torah and the unborn child. But I don't want to suggest at any stage that I make any medical pronouncements. Please consult your local qualified doctor to get your input on these issues, obviously. And even on the halachic issues, I think it's important to say that this is just an overview of the issues. Obviously, every specific individual circumstance is different and will not necessarily be covered by the things we're talking about. And people should take their shilas if they have individual issues or know of other people. They should take them to their local qualified rabbi. Rabbi Chapper will be very happy to receive all of your pressing questions and debate them with his learned colleagues as well. But I think that is an important point, and therefore I don't want anyone to feel that anything that I say over the next 3 weeks is specifically focused on their circumstances. It's probably not. And as I said, this is a sensitive topic. I will try and deal with it sensitively. There may be individuals here on the shir who've had who passed medical histories that are sensitive or know of other people who do. So please, I would ask you also to be sensitive when you raise questions to that fact. So what we are going to do, though, I think, which is going to be very exciting, is we're going to build up a knowledge base of key Torah sources on this issue of Torah and the unborn child, which I think are going to really excite us and take us forward. So let's start with this particular issue of fetal reduction. Let's give a little bit of medical background. Normally, a woman produces one mature ovum a month, and fertilization usually results in the growth of one fetus. That's the normal situation. However, there are people who, for various different medical reasons, have difficulty with ovulation. And over the past 50 years or so, there's been an enormous increase in medical options and therapeutic treatments that a woman can take ovulatory drugs, which enable her to produce multiple ova. Now, sometimes what happens is the doctors allow these to take their course and see which ones implant in which ways. But sometimes what happens is that they harvest these fertilized eggs, these fertilized ova, and they decide to implant them. And they have to make a decision as to how many fetuses to implant. Now, because of the historically low success rate, although things obviously are improving, and definitely high cost, one of the things that doctors often did in the past and still do is implant multiple ova into the womb in the hope that some of them, maybe 2 or 3, will do well. And what sometimes happens, occasionally, the undesired result is that you get very large numbers of actual successful, or at least in the initial stages, successful pregnancies building up in the womb, which brings an unsustainable number of babies there. And they have to reduce the number of fetuses in order for any of them to actually survive. Meaning if they let this pregnancy with 4, 5, 6 possibly implanted embryos go to full course, then it will ultimately be unsuccessful for all of them. So then, and there are all sorts of medical complications for the mother as well, eclampsia and gestational diabetes and all sorts of things like that. So the doctors have to make a decision to reduce the number of fetuses in the womb. Sometimes they reduce them by 1 or 2, and they, depending on the medical situation. And this presents a very fascinating halachic dilemma, because when in the standard case of abortion, which we'll deal with in a minute, usually the fetus is being terminated because of some problem for the mother, some medical issue with the mother, or some medical issue with the fetus, and we'll talk a little bit about that. In this case, all these fetuses at this stage of gestation are healthy. There's nothing wrong with them. The reason that we're terminating some of them is because we know that if we leave all of them, then it's not going to be long-term successful. And that's a difficult decision. Which ones do you terminate? These are healthy fetuses right now, and how many do you terminate? This is really what we're trying to deal with today. So there's a selective abortion, if you like, of the fetuses to work out what is the best therapeutic way forward. And this is normally done medically between around 9 and 15 weeks of gestation. Again, I stand to be corrected on any of these medical details, but it's not done at a very early stage. It's not done in a lab. When we talk next week about the genetic modification of embryos, there we're talking about things happening very early stages, with embryos in lab conditions before they've been implanted often. Here, they are implanted and they are already developing, and we have to wait until a certain point of the pregnancy to decide which ones to take away in order to let the other ones survive. And obviously the goal here being to enable this couple to have a baby which is healthy, maybe twins, maybe triplets even, but healthy babies. So let's have a look at the halachic issues here. We will build up, as I say, a picture which I think will be at times quite complicated, but I brought you a long source sheet. I put it on the chat. Actually, I'll put it on the chat again for those people who came in a little bit later. Second, I'll put it up now. Here it goes again. So the sheet is actually on the chat, and I think we're going to put it up on the Zoom link as well. So there is more material in this source sheet than I will be able to get through in one share. But I've put it there for your general reading and edification so that you can look at the footnotes and see how these things work. Okay, let's have a look at the basic overview. Let's start maybe with another religious position. The Catholic Church is very strict on this matter. They regard fetal reduction as fetal abortion, selective abortion. If you look here at the Catholic Church position, you'll see in a minute why this is an important contrast to us. I brought you at the very beginning here, number 1, a statement made a few years ago by the Vatican that the Pontifical Council for the Family, having been invited to express its position on so-called fetal reduction. Okay, I'm just going to mute people if that's okay, because there's a bit of noise coming in there. Let's just see if I can do that. Yep, that should do it. Okay, let's do this again. So again, the Catholic Church made the following declaration. Every embryo must be considered and treated as a human person in respect of his or her eminent dignity. That's one of their first principles. From the first moment of conception, the unborn must be accorded fundamental human rights, and above all, the right to life, which cannot be violated in any way. We must therefore affirm that fetal reduction, quotes unquote, is the same as selective abortion. It consists precisely in the direct and willful elimination of innocent human beings. Note the word innocent. We will see soon that innocence from a halachic perspective is not so relevant. It therefore, whether willed as an end or utilized as a means, always constitutes a grave moral disorder. So the Catholic Church is pretty clear. You are absolutely not allowed to do that because fetal reduction will be considered to be selective abortion. The Protestant position is more complicated, usually not more permissive, and the Islamic position is also more complicated, but we're not interested in studying Islam, and we're not interested in studying Catholicism today. We're interested in studying the status of the fetus in halacha. And again, whether as the medicine, someone just posted on the chat a very useful comment that the medicine on this is obviously developing, but and maybe now we are able to reduce the number of fetuses implanted and increase the chance of them actually surviving. But nevertheless, these sources are fundamental to all abortion questions, and we'll see also conjoined twins questions when we get to that. And therefore, it's really worthwhile us looking at these sources from the beginning. What is the status of the fetus in halacha? Let's start with that. Let's start with Chumash. Where do we see a reference to abortion in the Chumash itself? And the answer is in Shemot. In Parshas Mishpatim, you have the following scenario. Have a look at number 2, please. Ki yinatz v'chi anashim. If two men are fighting, says the Chumash, v'nagafu isha, and as part of their fight, they strike unintentionally a woman. She gets involved in the middle of the fight. Isha hara, a pregnant woman, v'yatsa'u yeladeha, and she loses the baby. She miscarries the baby as a result of being struck in this fight. V'lo yihye ason, and there is no ason. We'll see that ason means fatal injury. We'll see what that means in a minute. Anosh ye'anish. Then the man who struck her has to be punished, says Rashi. L'shalem, he has a financial penalty. Demei vladot lebal, he has to pay the value of the embryo to the husband, to the father, in some cases to the mother, depending on the situation. But it seems that the embryo has a monetary value. It's like an injury, just like if he injured the woman, he injured her arm, he injured her hand, a finger, a foot. There is a compensatory. The compensatory level, which reflects the injury. So too, apparently, the baby is part of that compensation scale. It's not a life in and of itself, it's a monetary value. And then it says, that applies if the husband takes this guy to court that injured his wife. The im asoni here, however, if there's a fatal injury, says Rashi, the isha, to the woman, if she dies as part of the process, then you've got a murder on your hands. Then it's nefesh tachas nefesh, potentially a capital crime, because this man, perhaps unintentionally but negligently, murdered this woman. What you see here is a clear distinction between killing the embryo and killing the mother. Killing the embryo incurs a financial penalty, and killing the mother incurs a criminal execution. And therefore, the first thing we see in the Chumash is that an embryo is not yet the same as a person. It's somehow different. And in fact, Rashi is getting this clearly from the Mechilta. I brought you here number 3, Anosh Yanesh, when it says he has to be punished if the embryo is lost. Mammon, it has to be money, and it brings down a connection there. How do I know it's money? Ata omer mammon, you say it's money, or Eino ela misa, maybe he has to be executed. It says no. And he learns from another case in the Chumash where he used the words onesh. Onesh just means a punishment. Just like there it's money, over here it's money as well. And there is no distinction made in the pasuk between as to how developed the embryo is, whether it's early stages, whether it's 9 months pregnant. It seems until it is born, it has a different status. Contrast that, interestingly, I'm just going to briefly look at this, with the position in the non-halachic ancient world, in the Jewish world, meaning there's a whole bunch of literature that comes out of the Second Temple period. The Septuagint, for example, which is the translation of the Torah into Greek by the Hellenist period. Also Philo, who is a very Hellenized Jew commentating on the Torah in Alexandria, 1st century CE. They actually bring a stricter position and says that if the baby is fully formed inside the womb, if it's a late stage, then it is considered a murder. Now, interestingly, that is not what we'll see in the halacha at all, but the Christian position, which is very strict on these issues, derived in no small way from these Hellenistic Jewish texts, rather than from the halachic Jewish texts, which is where our halacha comes from. And there is already, in the late Temple period, Second Temple period, a split there between, as I said, the halachic areas and the more Hellenist areas, which Christianity picked up on. Philo, by the way, the Christians considered to be very much an early Christian influence on Christian philosophy and theology, which is not for now. That's way beyond what we have to deal with now. So if you just look at the Chumash alone and you ask, is abortion murder? Is it murder to terminate a fetus? The answer seems to be no, it's not, because there is a financial penalty. Why would that be? So have a look here in number 6. Let's look at the sources specifically dealing with murder in the Torah. Not often you go to a shir talking about murder. It's not one of the halachic practical questions that most people have. I dare say nobody here is going to ask a shayla, am I allowed to murder my next door neighbor? Even though they may be highly irritating, it's usually not on people's agendas, but it's worthwhile learning the laws of murder because it comes up here. Number 6, says the Gemara, says the Chumash as follows: Makeh ish umet. If you hit a man and he dies, mot yumat, then that person who killed them is liable to the death penalty. Now, again, the actual practical implications of this were limited. It was very rare that the death penalty was administered. There are many, many conditions for the death penalty to be applicable. Even back in the day when there theoretically was a death penalty, it was hardly ever done. Rabbi Akiva says a court that imposes a death penalty once in 70 years is considered a court with blood on its hands. But in theory, murder is a capital crime. Now, what is ish? If you hit an ish means a male above bar mitzvah. That's what an ish means. So what if you murder a woman? Or what if you murder a child? Is that the same? So look at number 7. The Gemara, the Chilta immediately, the rabbis from the time of the Talmud immediately jump in and says, Eini ela ish. I only know a man. Eini ela shehika ish. Hika ish. What if you hit a woman? Or at katan, or if you hit a child, minayin, is that the same? And the Talmud says, of course it is. It's exactly the same. It's murder the same way. Talmud loma, ish kiyake kol nefesh. There's another pasuk that says, another verse that says, if somebody strikes any nefesh, any living being, nefesh adam, mot yumat, then they are a capital murderer. So it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman or a child, murder is murder. Lahavi, that includes, says the Mechilta, eshehiketa isha as a cotton. Now, here's the $64,000 question. Shoma'eni af ben shmona b'mashma. Maybe, what about a ben shmona? What's a ben shmona? An 8-month gestated baby. Is that murder? Meaning a highly developed baby in the womb. Maybe if it says kol nefesh, that comes to include everything. No. Talmud laima makeh ish. It says you have to hit a person. Magid she'einu chayev ad sheyarog ben kayama. It has to be a ben kayama. Ben kayama means a viable human being, someone who is alive. Someone who is alive and we think is staying alive. That's not a cue for a 1970s song, by the way, but someone who is alive and has a status of a chazaka that they're alive, that is called murder. An unborn child is not viable. It's in the womb. Even if it's in late stages, it's not yet in a situation where it can be status has a cheskas chias, it has a status of assumed that it will live. We don't know, maybe it will, maybe it won't. Therefore, it's not murder. A 1-day-old child, number 8, tinok ben yom echad, if a 1-day-old child is murdered, haharek chayev, that's liable, that's full-blown murder. But a pregnancy, if you kill a fetus, that it seems not to be full-blown murder, at least not a capital crime. And here I want to make a mention of an important distinction. Maybe it's murder, but just not technically capital murder. Meaning there can be different levels of murder. And we'll see Rav Moshe Feinstein in a few moments. We'll see when he talks about abortion generally, he clearly feels that abortion is murder. What about all these sources? He's saying, no, all these sources are just saying that if you murder a fetus, then that's not technically a capital crime, but it's still murder. There are other situations as well. If you murder a person who's terminally ill, that's still murder, but technically that's not a capital crime. So it may still be murder, but it's just not the same kind. But it may not be, we'll see soon. Fascinatingly, the situation for a non-Jew may be different, meaning halacha applies to non-Jews as well. There are Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, there are 7 Noachide laws, And one of those Noahide laws, of course, is murder. I actually gave a few shirim recently. You can find them on my website about the 7 Noahide laws, theft and murder and blasphemy, etc. One of them is murder. So is it the same if a non-Jew kills or if a Jew kills? And see, it's not. Here, look in number 9. Number 9 is the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is the area of the Talmud that deals with the Noahide laws. And the Gemara says as follows. Ben Noach Nerag, a non-Jew, is subject to the capital punishment for a number of crimes. Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amru, and Rabbi Shmuel's college of a school of law understood af al ha'uberim, even for a fetus. Now, we just saw that clearly a Jew is not subject to capital crime for a fetus, but a non-Jew is. My time at Rabbi Shmuel, what is the reason that a non-Jew is treated more in a stricter way? Because it says where the Noahide laws appear. Where would you look in the Chumash to find the Noahide laws? In the Parsha of Noach, obviously. In the Parsha of Noach, where God makes the Brit, the covenant with the non-Jewish world, who are all children of God, and if you like, siblings of the Jewish people. So God says there, Dichsiv, Shofech dam ha'adam, if you spill the blood of a person, ba'adam demo yishafech. By a person, his blood should be spilt. Obviously, there's a cadence in the verse there. Because every human being is made in the image of God. Now, if you just change, say Chazal, if you're on a halachic level, on a drash level, if you just change the position of the comma in that verse, now we normally on a pshat level, on a basic kind of translation level, you say shofech dam ha'adam. If you spill the blood of a person, comma, ba'adam damo yishafech, by another person his blood shall be spilled, say the rabbis, but just move the comma. Say as follows: shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam. If you spill the blood of a person within a person, comma, damo yishafech. And therefore the Gemara here says, Ezeo adam shehu ba'adam. What is a person within a person? That is ubar shebamei imo. And in fact, the Rambam rules that if a non-Jew kills an embryo, number 10, ben noach sheharag nefesh, afilu ubar b'mei imo, even an embryo within its mother's womb, neherag alav. That is considered to be full-blown capital murder. Now, what you have here is an interesting scenario. It sounds like if a person has to carry out an abortion, let's say, for halachically permissible reasons, let's say to save the life of the mother. We'll see in a minute, to save the life of a mother, abortion is always allowed, even up till the very latest of stages. Is it better to use a Jewish doctor or is it better to use a non-Jewish doctor? And the answer is, it is better to use a Jewish doctor, because for a Jewish doctor to abort a child is never going to be as serious an offense as for a non-Jewish doctor in halacha. In fact, the ideal choice is a female Jewish doctor, because as we'll see when we talk about the laws of abortion, if there is a prohibition, which there is about abortion, women are likely to be less included in that than men, and Jews less than non-Jews. So your ideal doctor is, for this purpose anyway, is a female Jewish doctor. You may conclude that your ideal doctor for all purposes is a female Jewish doctor, but for this purpose, it certainly is. So for a non-Jew, it sounds like it's worse. Rav Moshe Feinstein, and we'll just finish this section with him, Rav Moshe Feinstein says, no, don't get too carried away with this. He says, as far as he's concerned, killing fetuses is still considered to be murder, even when it comes to Jews. And he applies an interesting principle. Look at number 11 for a second. I've extracted 2 lines from a very, very long, detailed responsa. So if you look at number 11, he says, Hine bedava harigat ubar b'mei imo, b'Yisrael. When it comes to a Jew killing a fetus in the womb of its mother, mufurash b'Tosfos, he thinks, as far as I'm concerned, it's completely clear in the commentaries, in Tosfos, medieval commentaries on Sanhedrin, the asur is completely prohibited. But pshitas be'isur retzicha, as far as I'm concerned, it has to be murder. Even if it's not capital murder, it's murder. It's just a technicality that you don't get the death penalty. Why? And he brings an interesting general principle to think of. Mishum deleka midin Yisrael shari. It cannot be that something is permitted for a Jew, ula akum asur, but prohibited for a non-Jew. I can't believe it. Jews always have more prohibitions than non-Jews, not less prohibitions. The kol kach pshita, it's absolutely clear to me It has to be murder. And as far as Rav Moshe Feinstein is concerned, killing fetuses is always going, sorry, I forgot to share my screen there, apologies. It's always going to be murder to kill a fetus, even if a Jew does it. Now, we'll see, there's a problem with that. Because as I said, and we'll see right now, you're always allowed, not only allowed, but obliged, perhaps, to kill a fetus to save the life of a mother. So if it's murder, why would you be allowed to do that? We'll see that in a minute. But just to summarize at this stage, where have we got to? We've seen that the Chumash seems to say that the status of a fetus is less than that of a person who is already born. Okay, and we've seen that the penalty for killing a fetus is not capital murder. It may be murder, just you're off on a technicality, but it may be something even less than that, but it's certainly not capital murder. And finally, this last point Rav Moshe makes, that he can't believe that there's anything that's prohibited for a non-Jew but permitted to a Jew. By the way, that's not so straightforward. If you go through the Sheva Mitzvot, you will see that there may be things which are technically prohibited to non-Jews but permitted to Jews. Let me let you in on a little secret. Eiver min achai. This has nothing to do with abortion. This is just something that you probably will find interesting and you've never heard before. Maybe you have heard before. Eiver min achai, which is taking the limb of a live animal. Anything that came from a live animal is prohibited to eat. It's prohibited. So one of the shilas that comes up is, well, how are we allowed to eat eggs? Eggs are taken from a live animal. Okay, they're not bits chopped off the live animal, but they're taken out of a live animal. And the answer to that is the Torah explicitly says that you're allowed to eat eggs if you chase away the mother bird because you want to eat its eggs. So clearly the Torah says you're allowed to eat eggs. But say the poskim, well, that's Jews. How do I know that non-Jews are allowed to eat eggs? Are you allowed to make an omelet for your non-Jewish neighbor? Now, you may think that's a strange question, but it's actually quite an interesting debated question, because even if Eiver min achai for a Jew does not include eggs, Eiver min achai, a limb from a live animal for a non-Jew, may include a prohibition of eating eggs. Unless, of course, you take this principle, which is, no, it can't be that something is prohibited for a non-Jew that is permitted for a Jew. Okay, that just thought you'd like to think about that before you crack open an egg for your non-Jewish neighbors. That might be something to think about. Okay, fine. That's not for now, really. Milk, by the way, is a separate question as well. Why are you allowed to eat milk? Why are you allowed to eat honey? Why is honey even kosher? Why is honey kosher? It comes from a treif animal. It comes from a bee. How can you eat anything that comes from a treif animal is treif? So you could turn around and say, well, honey doesn't really come from a bee. Honey comes from pollen, and the bee just processes it, and therefore, it's not really from a bee, and that's why it's okay. Or you could turn around and say, no, it's from a bee, but it's just an exception. Everything that comes from a bee is just an exception. What's the implication to that debate? Royal jelly. Is royal jelly kosher or not? People like eating royal jelly. It's a health food. It used to be anyway. That comes from a gland on the queen bee. Is that kosher or not? Okay, ask your local Orthodox rabbi if you're interested in eating royal jelly, but that's part of this whole debate. Okay, now back to the unborn child. Like I said just now, there is an absolutely clear principle that the mother's life always comes before the baby's life, which is going to be a question, because if it's murder to kill a fetus, how can you murder one person to kill another person? You can never do that. So we'll see right now. We'll see if never really means never. Look at number 12, please. Number 12 says as follows. Again, what I want to do in this shir is lay down the basic sources, which will be the framework that we can use for the next two shirim. Says number 12, Ha'isha shehi maksheleled, very fundamental Mishnah. A woman who is lo aleinu in terrible trouble giving birth, and the doctors say that she may even die in the process. Says the Mishnah, Machatchim et havlad. We are allowed to, maybe even obliged to, that's a whole question there, to cut up the fetus, b'me'eh inside her, moitzi'in ato evarim evarim, and we can dissect, we can bring out the fetus, because her life always comes before the life of the fetus. However, yatsa rubai, once the majority of the baby has come out, which means, by the way, in a breech birth, the majority of the body, or in a regular birth, the majority of the head, ein noigimba, we may not touch the baby, we may not kill the baby to save the mother, She'ein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh. We never set off one soul against another. We never kill one person to save another. And that, of course, is quite a well-known principle. You never kill A to save B. We don't go in the hospital and kill patients to save other patients, even if it's obviously a 95-year-old man who is terminally ill, whose organs would be incredibly useful to save 5 or 6 young, healthy people or people who need organs. You can never kill a person to save another. That, of course, is the fundamental question behind organ donation in halacha. Organ donation, just in parentheses, organ donation is a massive mitzvah. What better could you do with your organs after you die than give them to people who can live a long and healthy life with them? So why would there ever be a potential halachic problem with organ donation? But after death, a person doesn't need the organs. And by the way, some people say, well, isn't it something to do with tchias hamesim when in the resurrection? It's not really. It's really got nothing to do with it. People who will come back in tchias hamesim will make it whether they have the organs at death or don't have the organs at death. The real issue is one of killing somebody to save another. How do I define the moments of death in halacha? This is not our share, but it's an important, very important medical question, which many of you, I'm sure, have looked at in halachic sense. What is the moment of death in halacha? Is it brainstem death, which in Talmudic terms equals respiration? Or is it cardiac death? The cessation of heartbeat. Which of those is it? And there's a massive debate on this, and as I say, I'm sure that you've looked into this before, but again, the key debate with organ donation is the person alive or dead? If they are alive, however we define it, we may not kill one person to save even multiple others. So here, back to the baby, if it's an unborn child, we maybe even must kill it to save the mother, but once it's born, we may not kill it to save the mother. You now have 2 people who are killing each other. A mother who is causing death to the baby causing death to the mother. Even if both of them are going to die, God forbid, you can't kill one in order to save the other. Although we'll see, maybe there'll be exceptions to that. Why? Why not? Why is an unborn child different? So again, this is our whole issue, Torah and the unborn child. Look at Rashi number 13. Okay, I hope everybody's with me. All the time, says Rashi, that it didn't come yet out into the air. The baby was not yet born. Avir olam, lav nefesh hu. It is not a nefesh. Now, when we get to multi-fetal reductions, we'll ask this question. Is a fetus a nefesh? Is it even included at all within the rubric of killing a nefesh? She says, no, it's not a nefesh. It's not 0, the Judaism doesn't come down to sort of trite comparisons between pro-life and pro-choice. That's not what we're talking about here. An embryo is definitely something, but it may not be a nefesh. The nita laharga, we're allowed to kill it to save its mother. Aval yatsa rosha, once its head comes out, the majority of the head crowns, ein noigim bo laharga, we may not touch it to kill it. Dehavale kiyalut. That's called born. It's a regular born human being. The ein doichin nefesh tachas mipnei nefesh. We may not set a life against another. Why not? Why can't we set a life against another life? Why can't we put a value on life? Well, that itself is a question which the Gemara raises in quite a famous statement, number 14. I know it's irritating when rabbis say this is famous. It just means that they know it. But this really, I think, is quite well known. Have a look in number 14. How do I know that I'm not allowed to murder someone to save another? Someone, God forbid, sticks a gun to a person's head and says, if you don't kill the guy standing over there, I'm going to kill you. You're not allowed to kill him because you can't save your life by taking his. So says the Gemara Svarahu, it's logical. It's pure logic. The Rabbah. Someone came to ask a question of Rabbah, one of the rabbis of the Talmudic period. Amali said to him, Amali Madura, if the government, if the Sultan, someone with capital power in their hands said to me, Katlei Laploini, you must kill this man, the Eloi, and if not, Katlina Lach, I'm going to kill you. Classic case, sticks a gun to his head. If you don't kill him, I'm going to kill you. How do I know you can't die? Amalei, you have to say to him, you have to be killed and you can't kill. Why? Because look at this word's very important. How do you know your blood is redder? Are you more alive than him? Dilma dama dahahu gavra, maybe the other guy's blood, son of Tvei, is redder than yours. Now, this obviously is a mashal, it's a metaphor, meaning, can you judge one life against another? And it sounds from the Gemara that you can't do that. That, two people who are both alive cannot be evaluated on the basis of their health, on the basis of their age, on the basis of their utility. You don't know who is more valuable. All life is infinitely valuable. Therefore, you may never kill one person to save another. An embryo, on the other hand, it sounds like we can say that the embryo's blood is less red on some level. They are less alive than a regular person. And that's important. And we'll see when it comes to this issue of fetal reduction, are we going to be able to label and say, well, his blood is lesser than that one? We'll see soon how that works. But remember that idea, this question that we're trying to work out, is his blood less red or more red than mine? And usually you can't say, but maybe sometimes you can. Which brings us to the next section. There's lots and lots of ideas here. We're going to just collect them and think about them. There is one person that you can kill in order to save another. Who is that? That is a roidef. Who is a roidef? The classic case of roidef, which I didn't bring you the classic case here. The classic case of roidef is obvious. You're a witness to a crime being committed. There is a murderer running down the street with a gun, trying to kill an innocent person, and you are standing there and you have the opportunity to stop the murderer. You are obligated to kill the murderer. You have to try and disable him. If you can't disable him, you're allowed to kill him, but you're allowed to kill him if necessary in order to protect the innocent person. How do you know that his blood is redder than his? Someone's going to die here. Who are you to decide who dies? Says, no, this person is a murderer. They are making a choice to try and kill this other one. You have an obligation to stop that. So a roidef is an exception. So the Gemara then raises the question of roidef when it comes to the baby. Let's plug that into the baby. What do we just say? If an unborn child threatens the life of the mother, then you must terminate the pregnancy. If a born child threatens the mother, then you may not touch it. So the Gemara says, why not? Look at number 15. Yatsa rosha ein nogim bo. So the Gemara quotes this Mishnah. If the head comes out, you may not touch the baby. Lefi she'ein doichin nefesh. Because you cannot kill one person to save another. And now the baby is born, the baby is a person. You can't kill it. Amai says, why, says the Gemara? Roidef who? Isn't this baby a roidef? This baby is pursuing actively, if you like, unwittingly, but actively pursuing the life of the mother. Why can't I kill the baby? The baby is half in and half out. Meaning, obviously, the baby is completely out, then there's no point killing the baby. But if the baby is half in and half out, and the doctors say, well, we have to kill this child in order to save the mother, why not? It's a roidef, it's killing the mother. Says the Gemara, Sha'ani Hasam. No. This is not a regular case of roidef. Dubishmaya kamarad fila. Because the baby hasn't made a choice to chase the mother. The baby is killing the mother min hashamayim, from heaven, as it were. Meaning this is its natural state of affairs. Now, this is a very interesting question. What is going on here? I keep forgetting to share my screen. I apologize. What is going on here? The Gemara says here that a baby is not a rodef. Why? Because it's natural. The baby didn't choose to do this. What you basically have is you have a mother who's naturally killing the baby and a baby who's naturally killing the mother. Neither of those is called a roidef. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not because the baby is innocent. This is where we come back to the Catholics. The Catholic says babies are innocent, therefore you can't touch them. Let me let you in on an interesting secret. A roidef could still be innocent and still be a roidef. Let me give you the following scenario. Let's say you're walking through the forest and then you look over and you see a hunter, with a gun, trained on an animal, and you stop and watch and you think, there's a man hunting over there. I mean, regardless of what you feel about hunting animals, let's put that to the side. And then you look more closely and you see with horror that this innocent hunter is actually about to shoot a person. I don't know, someone with an antler hat on, wandering through the forest, maybe on his stag night appropriately. And therefore you see with absolute horror that this hunter is about to kill a person. Are you allowed to kill the hunter as a rodef? The hunter's innocent. He thinks he's killing an animal. The halacha is yes, you are. Because this person, even though they're innocent, someone asked, someone non-compos mentis is still a rodef. No, someone who's non-compos mentis is not liable in halacha at all. So the question is, I don't think it's possible to be non-compos mentis and to be a rodef at the same time. That will be more of a natural kind of thing. I'm not sure 100%. The baby, you say the baby is non-compos mentis and it's not a rodef. It's just acting out of instinct, acting naturally. But this hunter is compos mentis. And therefore, when he's about to shoot this person innocently, you can stop them because even though they're innocent, they're still a rodef. But the baby is different. The baby is natural. It's not making a choice of any kind. And so it sounds from the Gemara that we've dismissed the possibility of rodef. And again, I hope you're sort of thinking these issues through. When you're talking about a multi-fetal reduction, are any of these babies rodef on the others? We're going to have to ask that question maybe. Maybe when the doctor examines this pregnancy and he says, and he does a scan and there are 5, 6 fetuses there, can you turn around and say, well, actually, this one is really causing the problem for that one. And it's therefore this one is the one we have to designate as a rodef, or it sounds from this, that a baby just can't be a rodef. They're just doing what comes naturally. An interesting point here, all these good medical points on the chat here. The most common case of a baby getting stuck is a shoulder dystocia. I'm sorry, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. When the head is already out, in that case, both mother and baby will die. Why can't we save the mother? That's exactly the point. Why can't we save the mother? Because the baby is alive, and you cannot kill one person to save another. What if they'll both die? So you're making an interesting point, which we'll get to that in a minute. Maybe it's a little bit different if they're both going to die anyway, because then you're gaining nothing by not. We'll see that case coming up right now. The complicating factor is the Rambam. The Rambam, who Maimonides, when he brings this halachic psak, he says as follows. Look at number 16. Hari zeh mitzvat lo taseh shelo lachus al nefesh harodef. You are not allowed to have mercy on a rodef. You have to get in there. You have a mitzvah to intervene. You can't stand by and watch something happen. You have a mitzvah of lo tamud al dam ri'echa. Someone's being chased. You have to get involved. Lefikach, therefore, he says, Hoyru chachamim, the rabbis taught, sheha'ubra shehi makshaleled, that a baby, that a woman who is having terrible difficulty giving birth, you are allowed to you're allowed to terminate the pregnancy inside her, bein basam, whether medically, ben bayad, or surgically. And the Rambam just does what we didn't think he would do, which is the Rambam says that the baby is indeed ka roidef. He's like a rodef. Achrei lahorga. But once the baby has already come out, like the Mishnah said. And there's an enormous literature, by the way, about trying to work out why does this Rambam seem to say the opposite of the Gemara. The Gemara just concluded that a baby cannot be a rodef. It's natural. But the Rambam seems to say it is, although note, he didn't say it is a rodef. He said it's ka rodef. And I brought you in the footnotes, really, we haven't got the time for it now, but many ways to understand that the baby could be a type of rodef, not a full rodef, and there are many ways of resolving this issue. Is it only when the baby's in the womb that it has a sort of quasi rodef status? Again, it will take us far beyond the ability of what we can do today. But again, the footnotes are hopefully very clear, and you're going to be able to see from there how that works. But the Rambam definitely throws a complication in here by calling the baby a kind of rodef, and throws open the possibility that at least an embryo in utero may be some kind of rodef. Okay, fine. Okay, let's move on, because we need to look at other halachic perspectives. We've got a lot to do, and we've only got 15 minutes left, even a bit less, maybe 10 minutes left. It is important to lay down at this stage that a pre-embryo meaning an embryo which has been fertilized in the lab but not yet implanted, has a far lesser status. It's not even an Adam Sheba Adam. It's not even a person within a person. It's a potential person in a lab. Now, it does have some status, but it doesn't have the same status. However, this won't help us because multi-fetal reductions, as I said at the beginning, are not done in the lab. They're done already when the babies obviously are implanted. But it is important to know that there are other halachic perspectives on abortion. We've seen Rav Moshe Feinstein, who says that he feels that it is a Torah prohibition of murder, even if it's not technically capital murder. But there are other perspectives as well. Most poskim understand, and I brought you a link to another share that I gave in more detail on abortion. Most poskim understand that abortion is prohibited under Torah law. Again, not when there's a reason for the health of the mother. That's different, but we'll come to that in a second. There may be other reasons that it is a Torah prohibition. It may be the prohibition of hashchatat zera, the destruction of seed. It may be a chavala, it may be an injury, an unlawful injury. It may be the loss of potential life. Don't forget, even a sperm is a potential life, and the issue of wasting seed, an embryo is certainly no lesser potential life than a sperm is. It's much more potential life, even though it might not be fully alive. And therefore, most posts can take the view that that abortion is a Torah prohibition, even if it might not be murder. A minority of posts can take the view that abortion is a rabbinic prohibition, maybe something that is akin to murder or like murder. Why is this important? Now, I'll tell you obviously why it's important, because if you are going to permit abortion, which Judaism does under certain circumstances, the way you classify abortion will have a massive impact on the circumstances in which abortion is permitted. For example, if you say that abortion is murder, there are very few, if any, situations that will justify it other than the explicit one, which is the life of the mother. If you say that abortion is not murder, but it's another Torah mitzvah, maybe that will be set aside for the case of the health of the mother or the serious health of the child. If you say it's a rabbinic prohibition, then that even reduces it further and will allow abortions for other purposes. Are you allowed to abort a child in a situation of where the child is severely disabled? Now, in some situations, yes. In some situations, no. Again, I'm not going to, every case is different. But one of the main factors in that shaila, in that halachic question, will be what exactly is the prohibition of abortion? And the higher up the chain you kick it in terms of murder, the much lower likelihood that you will be able to justify it. An interesting question, horrific question that came up in the First World War. There was a German soldier in the First World War, when, of course, there were many Jews fighting in the German army as well, who impregnated, this was a non-Jew, who impregnated a Jewish woman. He raped her and impregnated her, and he told a Jewish doctor to perform an abortion. And the doctor says, no, I'm not going to perform an abortion. I'm sorry, that's against my religion. And then the soldier stuck a gun to his head and said, if you don't abort this child, I will kill you. Now, that's an interesting shaila, because if it's just two people, shoot him or I'll shoot you, then okay, his blood and my blood, who says whose blood is redder? But in this case, when you're dealing with an unborn child, it's not so straightforward, because we've seen that the status of an unborn child is less than that of a full person, and therefore the answer may not be the same as it would be in the classic gun to the head case. Okay, we've done a lot, but we still got a little bit more to do, if you bear with me. I just want to introduce 2 or 3 more sources which will hopefully lay the foundations. First of all, the fetus before 40 days has a different status. It's important that you understand this. The Gemara says here, number 18, Amar Rav Chizda, ad arba'im, until 40 days of gestation, maya ba'al mehi. The fetus is simply fluid. It's simply bodily fluid. And therefore, there is certainly no prohibition of murder. You can't murder fluid. It will be halachically prohibited to destroy it for no reason, because it is still potential life. etc. But there will be many more reasons to justify destroying a pregnancy in that very early stage, certainly before implantation. And then you get into a whole discussion about the morning after pill. What does the morning after pill do? Does it prevent implantation in some cases? Does it prevent the pregnancy from continuing? But either way, the morning after pill is working with a child, a fetus which is less than 40 days gestated. And therefore, you will always be in more flexible situations, even though it might not always be permitted. But the last source, which really I need to show to you when we get into the issue of multifetal reductions, is the following one. And this really, is important for us, because when we get to co-conjoined twins next week, this will be, or 2 weeks from now, this will be a key one. The needs of the many versus the needs of the few. And let's just look at this source together. And this, I'll leave you to think about this overnight. Number 19. Siyah Shel Bnei Adam, says the Tosefta, a group of people who were captured, they were kidnapped. She'amru lahem goyim, and bandits came and kidnapped them, and they said to them, Tnu lanu echad mikem, hand over one of you, v'nargehu, and we will kill him or her. Ve'im lav, and if you don't hand anybody over, hari anu horgim et kulchem, we're going to kill all of you. So randomly, you pick a person and hand him over, him or her, or we're going to kill all of you. What should they do? Yeharagu kolam, they should allow themselves to be killed. Va'al yimsaru lahem nefesh achad misrael, you may not hand over a Jewish person to be killed just to save your life. Why? Because how do you know his blood is redder than yours, or your blood is redder than his? How do you know that the blood of 100 people is redder than the blood of one person? You don't. Life is infinite. Aval, however, says the source here, im yichduhu, if they specify them and they say, no, we want that guy, we want her, we want him, if you do lahem, kagon sheyichdu l'sheva ben bichri, as in the case of Sheva ben Bichri, more about him in a minute, yitnu lahem va'al yeharagu kolam, then you can hand them over. So the first opinion here says that if someone is designated, they are the one to die, then you can hand them over. Then they can be killed. You don't kill them actively, but you can hand them over to be killed. Who is Sheva ben Bichri? Sheva ben Bichri is a story in the book of Shmuel Bet, where David HaMelech is being hunted, is being chased by Sheva ben Bichri, who is from the tribe of Binyamin. I believe, and he was on the run from David HaMelech, and he holed up in a city, and he took refuge there. And Yoav ben Tzruya, who was David's main general, came to the city and said to the city, "We're going to besiege you because you're harboring fugitives." And the Isha Chachama, a wise woman, came onto the walls of the city and said, "Why are you killing all of us? We're not guilty. Why don't you just kill him?" So Yoav said to her, "Well, of course, just hand him over. If you hand him over, then of course we won't kill you. We want him." And they handed him over. She gave his head, and that was the end of that. And the Gemara learns from that when the person is specified, then that's allowed. And then there are other opinions, maybe only if they're guilty, like Sheva ben Bichri, many if they're only going to die anyway. And therefore, this is going to be part of our discussion when we come to conjoined twins. Are we ever allowed to able to say that in a case of multifetal reduction that this particular fetus has been designated? This is the one that needs to be killed, and therefore we can sit around and say we're allowed to hand over one in order to save the many. And ultimately, there is a significant debate. Do they need to be guilty? Do they not need to be guilty? And the Ramah, the Shulchan Aruch, actually brings both opinions. Now, clearly, a fetus is not guilty of a capital crime like Sheva ben Bichri, but there is a relevant issue here, which one of you actually said here before, that if they're all going to die anyway, so maybe you could turn around and say, well, their blood is clearly less red because they're a dead man walking. If we can save ourselves by killing this one, then that obviously changes the circumstances. In fact, Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein, who is one of the main poskim in Eretz Yisrael today, the son-in-law of Rabbi Elyashiv, he actually compared multifetal reduction to the case in the Tosefta and said that if they're all going to die anyway, and you're able to kill certain embryos in order to save the others, then that is permitted. because he compared it to that case. Because if everybody's going to die, maybe you'll be allowed to hand somebody over, or alternatively, or possibly additionally, we said already that the fetuses are not subject to the prohibition of choosing one life over another. We don't say ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh because of a fetus, because a fetus is a lower level status than a full person who is fully alive. Somebody asked a question here: the baby is still attached to the umbilical cord. I'm not sure why the head being out makes a difference. Well, why does it being attached to the umbilical cord make a difference? The baby can be breathing, can be independent, and still technically attached to the umbilical cord. The halacha doesn't make any distinction between whether the umbilical cord is cut or not. The distinction is whether the baby is out of the mother or in the mother. Once the baby is out, meaning majority in a breech or majority of the head, then the baby is considered to be out. That's a clear point. The umbilical cord is not relevant there. There is another suggestion. Let me just leave you with a couple of other things. Rav Zilberstein also asked the question, what about the case of the tractor? If people, God forbid, are trapped under the rubble, and the only way to save them is to bring a tractor in and try and clear the rubble, but the tractor itself may kill people in the process of clearing the rubble in order to take the rocks off. So again, that's a case where everybody will die if you don't do anything. And therefore he said in that case as well, similar case, it's permissible to bring in the tractor, even though you may actively hasten the death of some in order to save the others. Somebody asked a question: when the head is out, they're still receiving oxygen from the placenta. Good, they still are. But why is that relevant? That's not necessarily halachically relevant. Who's receiving blood from whom? You're assuming that makes a difference in the halacha. It doesn't. The halacha distinguishes between a child in utero and a child out of utero. And you've put here, not until, again, I don't doubt you at all in terms of medical, not until the blood supply from the umbilical cord stops do they start breathing independently. Okay, correct. But who says that's a halachically relevant distinction? That's a medically relevant distinction. But we're dealing with law here, and law makes its own definition, just like English law. When a person is dead, let me just make a comparison here. When a person is dead in English law is a legal decision. It's not a medical decision. It's a legal definition. The lawyers decide when you're dead, not the doctors. The doctors ask the lawyers, according to the law, is this person dead? And then the doctors follow the law. So all of these statuses of alive, dead, embryo, non-embryo, by definition are always legal definitions. They're never medical definitions. The medicine will follow the law. As a proof for that, the law has changed over the last 50 years. 50 years ago, heartbeat determined death. Now, brainstem determines death. And that's simply a legal change, not just a medical one. So where does this leave us, practically speaking? So I brought you the end of the sheet here. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was approached with a couple of cases. One was a woman pregnant with sextuplets, where the doctor said they had to reduce the number of fetuses. One was a woman whose pelvis was very small, and she had quadruplets, obviously because of a fertility treatment. And Rav Shlomo Zalman permitted multi-fetal reductions where continuing the pregnancy will carry a high risk of a miscarriage. And again, he actually ruled that each of the fetuses had the status of a quasi-rodef, like the Rambam said, that a baby in utero is a quasi-rodef. And whilst two living people who are trying to kill each other, you cannot choose between them, the rodef, because they're in the womb, is not yet the status of a living person, and therefore has a different halakhic status too. And Rav Chaim David Alevi, very important posek in Tel Aviv, who no longer alive, he also said, since also take into account, like I told you, there is a body of opinion that abortion itself is a lower level prohibition, not murder, a Torah prohibition of another kind, or maybe even a rabbinic prohibition, that gives us more leniency to be able to reduce the number of fetuses, even when they're not killing the others, but maybe affecting the health of the others. What if the doctors say, well, these fetuses will live, but if you keep them all, then they'll all be severely sick. They will all be damaged in some way. And if you take some of them out, the others will be fully healthy. He was prepared to accept that as a phenomenon, as a halakhically acceptable situation too. Realistically speaking, it's almost always the doctors that decide which fetus to be removed, because that will depend a lot on the positioning of the fetuses. Just because one is sick, and one is healthy, that's not necessarily the reason to take away the sick one, unless that's actively threatening the life of the others. Let's say one of the fetuses will die, and that will therefore cause danger to the death of the others. Therefore, ultimately, it's a medical issue, and the physician in each case will decide how many fetuses and which ones. But bottom line, halachically, multi-fetal reduction is permitted in halacha, depending on the individual circumstances. Usually will only be when there are 4 or 5, very rarely when there are 3, and almost never when there are 2, but every case is different, like I said at the beginning. So what we've seen here, just to summarize, and I hope that this has laid down some of the principles of halacha that we're going to carry forward. Let's just summarize as follows, because it's now 9 o'clock where you are. I'm sure you've got places to go, people to see. Actually, maybe not, but it's 11 o'clock here, that's for sure. And I've got places to go, which is bed. Thank you, Martin. Hello to you. And just to summarize, therefore, we've seen very clearly a number of key factors. An embryo has a lower status in halacha than a live person. It may have a rodef factor as well, even though we don't say a live baby is rodef. And when it comes to this issue of can you save the many by sacrificing the one, so that will depend on lots of circumstances. Are they all going to die? Have they been specified? And again, that we didn't have a chance to bring that out as clearly as we will do. But in 2 weeks from now, when we look at conjoined twins, think about that. You've got 2 babies who are now very much alive, very much independent, who need to be separated, and if one of them has to be killed to save the other, then you're really in a situation of a real dilemma there, where you're not dealing with embryos at all, and that we'll look at in 2 weeks. So I'm sorry I took you a minute or 2 over time, but hopefully it was worth it. I don't know if anybody has any questions, if I can answer any questions.
Sorry, I've just got one question. I was the one asking about the umbilical cord and whether the halachic status of it. So obviously, I completely appreciate, obviously, halakha states that when the minute the head is out, the baby is separate from the mother. Which, I understand there's a difference between halakha and science, but I don't understand why that makes a huge difference between, because obviously when the baby's in utero, say beyond 32 weeks, a baby in utero can be out of the uterus and survive and be well and function completely normally. So I'm just struggling to understand, like, for example, if there is a case of severe shoulder dystocia where the baby actually is completely stuck, and thank God that happens very rarely now, where actually you do have to, it's horrible, you have to remove parts of the baby in order to save the mother. I'm struggling to understand why that's not acceptable, because otherwise both the mother and the baby will die, and at that point the baby is still fully attached to the mother and fully part of the mother. It just happens to be that the head is out of the body.
Right. So again, where in a situation where both of them may die, the halacha may be different, because we're not really saving the mother in that case. But the only way we can save the mother is by killing the baby, and if we do nothing, then both of them will die. But your point there about 32 weeks is, it's not the question as to whether the baby is viable if we take it out. Once we take it out, then it's out. But when it's in, it's not viable because it's still in utero. A baby in utero, by definition, is not viable as an independent being. It's only viable if we manage to get it out. So once we get it out, then it's a full-blown person. I agree. A 32-week gestated embryo, once we manage to get it out into the world and breathing, is a full-blown person, 100%. But the key distinction in halacha is in or out. That's the key. When you're in, you are
obviously the head being out, the rest of the baby's still in, and the placenta is still attached to the lining of the womb, and the umbilical cord is still providing sustenance to the baby and oxygen supply. So yes. I mean, that's my only query, is that why, like, I understand if the head's completely out, I mean, at that point, it's irrelevant anyway. If the body's completely out, it's irrelevant anyway. Right. What I'm saying is that if the head's out, but the baby's completely stuck, and the woman starts deteriorating, say she's hemorrhaging, and the baby's, the baby's deteriorating because its blood supply is failing, then surely, I mean, what is the halachic implication of that?
I think you, at the end of the day, you have to decide at what point you say a baby is born. When is born? When does born happen? Does born happen when the waters break? Does born happen when the baby,
I would say when the baby is out of the body. Personally.
Okay,
like,
but that,
head,
but
shoulders,
that,
knees, and toes out of the body.
okay, I get that. What if the umbilical cord is still attached? Is it born according to you?
Yes. Once the baby is completely out of the body and the umbilical cord can be cut because it's literally there, and therefore the baby can exist on its own outside of the mother, then it's born. But when the head's out, if the umbilical cord snapped or something like that happened, the likelihood is that both mother and baby would die.
Right, I understand that,
wouldn't be born.
But I understand that, and again, the halachic case in the case where mother and baby may die will be different potentially. But at the end of the day, you're still having to draw a fairly arbitrary line as to when is born and when isn't born. I'll give you an example. For example, I don't want to take everyone over time, but what's his name? Peter Singer, who is professor of bioethics in Princeton, who is a very important voice on ethics on different levels. He has a very controversial position. He says until a baby is conscious of itself, which he says is 1 month old, the baby is not really alive in any kind of real sense. And as far as he's concerned, should be permitted to kill. They just could have rather euphemistically call it post-birth abortion. You should be able to kill a 2-week-old baby for good reasons, not arbitrarily. But as far as he's concerned, that's not really born yet. He wants to draw the line somewhere else. So I'm just saying that I don't agree with that, and halacha doesn't agree with that, but you're drawing the line where you draw the line. Halacha says the key issue is in or out. Once the baby is out in a material sense, then it's a full-blown person, and then you have to go to a different set of laws. At the end of the day, legal definitions are always going to be a little bit arbitrary, because the law has to make a distinction between A and B, and the science will come along and say, well, on the one hand, on the other hand, this and this and this and this, and that line, for example, when is death? Like I said, death happens in a number of different cases, respiratory death, cardiac death, cellular death, etc. The law just has to make a decision. This is the line. Beyond this, the person is dead. Before this, the person is alive. And that line is a potentially flexible line. I think we're seeing from what you're saying quite sensibly is that the line of birth could be also drawn in different places as well.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes, of course.
So you've said about the law, it needs to draw a line, but a lot of the sources you brought are medieval sources, or the latest one is Rav Moshe that was in the 1980s. Medicine and science has moved on a lot since then, and so has IVF and the state of embryos. In the past 2 years, it's moved on light years, and the fact that IVF is only 41 years old this year. Do you have any more up-to-date sources that deal with the current situation of embryos, that can deal with embryos today, rather than the sources where a lot of those Rabbonim and the commentators had no idea about the science that they would be creating?
The point is that the science will obviously be highly relevant to how the sources are applied. But the sources are the sources, meaning the sources of law lay down the basic fundamental principles of law. The rabbis then obviously have to be completely up to speed with the application of the law, which will depend on the up-to-date science. But a source, it's fundamental, a Talmudic source which is 1,500 years old, which lays down a principle of law, is not out of date because it's 1,500 years old. The application of it has to be up to date. In Hilchos Shabbos as well. Why are you not allowed to turn on a light on Shabbos? The rabbis did not have lights, obviously. The law is a fundamental concept, which is, if you like, permanent and eternal. The application of that law, though, has to be very relevant to the circumstances. So I don't think you need to have sources which are more recent in terms of the fundamental principles. You need to have someone who knows absolutely the current medicine and the medical realities to apply those sources correctly. Meaning somebody who uses, I give my analogy, let's continue the analogy. Someone who says, well, turning on lights on Shabbos is X and it's not allowed, but you're dealing with an LED light as opposed to a filament light, and they're using a source from the 1950s dealing with filament lights, but actually today they're dealing with LED lights. That's obviously not going to be applicable, but the principles are the same. It's just that that person has failed to understand that the reality on the ground has changed now. Therefore, the principles have to be applied in a different way. But the fact that the sources are old is neither here nor there. I haven't really brought you, Rav Moshe was just an issue of that he feels that abortion is murder. All the sources that I brought you were classic sources from the Talmud. And in halacha, the sources are always going to be from the Talmud. You just need to make sure that your rabbi is up to speed in the technology and the reality to make sure those sources apply. You hear what I'm saying? So I don't think an up-to-date source is necessarily more valid as a source of law. I'm interested in knowing what you're saying. What is the difference you're saying in terms of IVF implantation that makes the big difference here? I just lost you. Sorry.
Fetal reduction is now implanting more than one embryo is now really frowned upon unless in extreme circumstances, and how they determine what's a safe embryo and the DNA of embryos before they go in is far more advanced and actually determining what's a life and the genetic makeup of an embryo is light years ahead of where a lot of these commentators at the time of writing it could even have conceived of the idea. And I would also say that using terminology such as murder and abortion when they're just not up-to-date terminology, it's
no, but you're dealing with a different case. You're not dealing with the case I'm discussing. I'm discussing a case where there are embryos there, and we're trying to work out which ones we're going to remove. You are saying, well, in today's world, we just don't do that as much, which is obviously better. So it doesn't negate any of the sources that we talked about. It's just a different case. It's a bit like autopsy. We can have a shir dealing with autopsy, talking about how the halakhic problems with autopsy, and then someone will come along and say, well, actually today we hardly do any autopsies because we have used MRI scans. Okay, that's great. That's just a new. So you're saying that now we don't, in practice, implant as many embryos. That doesn't mean that any of these sources are less valid for a situation where we do. You're just saying that we can avoid the problem, which is amazing that we can avoid the problem. But it doesn't negate, these sources don't need to know about the current reality in order to deal with the case that they're dealing with. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
I understand with what you're saying. I just respectfully disagree.
Well, we'll see next week when we deal with the we'll see when we deal with this issue of the embryo. If you're talking about we're dealing with embryos pre-implantation, then absolutely it's different. But we're not dealing with that case here. We're dealing with case A. You're dealing with case B. Then of course it's going to be different. So I think.
If you implant multiple embryos and you're saying more than 3, then the likelihood of survival rate of those embryos is going to start off much lower, and the chance of the embryos implanting is much lower. So therefore you're not starting on the same playing field as you would a healthy woman with all healthy embryos with the chance of every one of them implanting with successful DNA. And so it's not an exact picture as that you've painted it, that they're all going to become healthy babies. So it's not, medically it doesn't work out that way.
Well, good. I'm pleased that medical science has moved on to a point where we can avoid some of these halakhic problems. That's progress. But that doesn't, again, we can go in circles here. People want to go away, but that doesn't take away from any of these principles. You're just simply saying that we have now moved to a place which halakhically we can avoid these problems in the first place. That's amazing. And next week, I think you're going to have a lot more input because we are talking about embryos rather than fetuses, and hopefully that will be a case which is more comparable to what's going on with embryo DNA research today. Okay, we have to leave it there because it is late, but thank you for coming on the share. I hope you found that helpful and useful, and I look forward to seeing you, Be'ezrat Hashem, next week. Thank you so much. Thank you.